The container, along with advances in information technology co-evolving with advances in business organization, are perhaps more than any other combination of factors responsible for trade as we know it today. Disaggregated supply chains, trade focus on tasks, not goods. Today, when people contemplate globalization and interconnected, interdependent economies, outsourcing of jobs, trade displacing locally produced goods, and access to vital commercial pathways and the other hallmarks we consider unique to our age, it is important to remember we've been through this before, how badly leaders of the day misunderstood the dynamics at play and consequently how badly it ended the last time. The last stage of globalization was built entirely on advances in technology. This time the advances in technology are buttressed by a stabilizing institutional structure, such as the World Trade Organization, structures meant to institutionalize free trade. The first great age of globalization lasted about 2/3 of a century. The second great age of globalization, where we find ourselves now, began with the end of the Second World War. It took a quarter century just to get back to where we left off at the close of the first in terms of overall economic integration, but in some areas the loss was permanent. Given that we are approaching that point at which the last age of globalization failed, it is a useful exercise to examine the characteristics of the current age of globalization. We no longer trade in what we make for what we don't make but need. We now trade in order to get what we need to make what we make. Before, we were self-sufficient in some but not all of what we needed and could trade the excess of what we made to fill the gaps. Now we are self-sufficient in nothing but make everything. The first myth we should address is that 90% of world trade moves by water. That's simply not true. A more correct rendering of the phrase is that 90% of world trade in physical stuff or merchandise trade, as measured by volume, moves by water. When measured by value, the number is closer to around 65%. The second key issue is that given the difference in trade as measured by value versus volume, it is clear that an awful lot of high-value stuff moves by means other than water. And that is principally air, and the importance to the global economy of aviation supply chain networks cannot be overemphasized. Of the stuff that moves by water, it is no longer simply boxes of manufactured goods made in competition with local labor, which leads to our next myth, and by far the most important, the idea that the Made in label has any relevance at all in today's version of trade. The Made in America label plate does nothing other than manage a perception. The fact is, we frequently have no idea where something made in America or made anywhere else is really made. A loaf of bread sold in a local market here can have ingredients from up to 14 different countries. The disruption of a single plant in any part of the world that produces some innocuous but critical component like an electronic power switch can cascade out into disrupt production processes all over the world. Thus, while virtually all countries say that a serious crisis of security alliance would prevail, in the end we simply won't know which side a given country will take until the time comes and the internal battle between elites and the population is waged. To say the world's economies are interdependent does not adequately or even remotely express the true nature of today's global economic activity. Vulnerabilities exist everywhere, the most serious being those obscured by the very complexity of the system. But it is imperative that those charged with regulating and protecting the system of global trade have a good appreciation of what it is they are regulating and protecting. So while bad guys can be dangerous, bad policy can be fatal.